Well, kia ora, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this event. It's a great privilege for me to talk about the subject that's probably the dearest to my heart, apart from my family, of course. And the issue of books and being a bibliophile. Now, as I was presented, I'm a bookseller. I've been a bookseller for 50 years in Hedley's Books in Masterton, and been a reader even longer. So I suppose that does qualify me a little bit to be a bibliophile as well. But I was interested in the subject and the way it was titled today, The Dilemma of a Book Bibliophile. It was quoted as saying, book collecting is variously described as a passion, an obsession, even a disease. Bookselling the same. Bookseller Ruth Shaw and book collector Tony Eyre will talk about the affliction / gift of bibliophilia, where it has taken them in their lives, and the dilemma of where to put all the books. End of quote. Well, anyone who has read A Bookseller at the End of the World will know where Ruth puts them all. She just opens another bookshop. And Tony, in his wonderful book, he just buys a library building and adds it to his house. I must say, when I saw the blurb, I thought, disease? I'm certainly, if I have got a disease, it's a very slow developing, non-fatal one, at least so far. Although I must say, getting up and down the odd library ladder has led to the odd Darwin moment, so I'm probably lucky I've got this far. But I've followed my passion for reading all these years, and I'm still standing, and even more importantly, I'm still reading. So I don't think it's a disease. I think it's an absolute gift, but I'll let you decide whether it's an affliction or a gift after hearing these two bibliophiles talk today. And just the word bibliophile is interesting, isn't it? It's I had a quick look in my short Oxford English Dictionary, which isn't that short. You probably know it. It's the two big volumes. And it's classed as a person who collects or loves books. Well, I certainly fit that one. But apparently the term has been around in the English language since 1820. But it's been a fashion and course it's been indulged in for way far back since before then, even Roman times. Cicero was one apparently, so we sit in very illustrious company. Anyway, definitions aside, I think our guests are well qualified to talk both as a bookseller, both as authors, and as a book collector. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tony Eyre, author of The Book Collector, subtitled Reading and Living with Literature, but as much a travelogue and memoir, and Ruth Shaw, author of the best-selling Bookseller at the End of the World and her ever most charming Bookshop Dogs. So we're delighted to have you here.
Actually, David, there is another term, bibliomaniac.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a person who must possess the books, must collect them, but doesn't read them. So I think if you've got a garage full of banana boxes filled up, you are a bibliomaniac, which is not me, but...
That term was actually reference to the famous J.P. Morgan, who the financial man who collected 350,000 books in his lifetime using his massive wealth. But of course now it benefits New York City because it's that wonderful, the Morgan Library, which is one of the most fabulous libraries in the world. So even as a bibliomaniac, he can do good things. So where should we start? So what interests me is that both your backgrounds are very, not necessarily that booky in the sense that your parents and your families weren't booksellers like mine, but you found books, and maybe you could each just give a little bit of background to your early lives and why books were so important to you. So who would like to start? Tony.
Okay, obviously as a child, I'm talking about the late 50s, early 60s at school, Janet and John, Remember those? I walked, and what did I see? I saw John, and he saw me. So those very early repetitive monocultural books, of course. And then the Christmas pillow slip at the end of the bed, Biggles, Enid Blyton, Five Go Here and There, Secret Sevens. All that was part of that early nostalgic build-up of the love of books. So that's very much where it started for me. And then subconsciously having books. It's only when I had this, we had this house in Auckland, which, a simple bungalow that had this very much older room attached by an English doctor, about 1880 room, absolutely beautiful. Then I realised after the last child had left home that this was perfect for a library, and that's when there was the switch in my mind that I was now going to collect books.
And in your school days, you got some pretty serious reading. So you were fascinated by J.K. Baxter, I think, and you were reading some pretty powerful stuff when you're at St. Peter's, a Catholic school.
In Auckland.
Were there some inspiring teachers there, or?
Well, also that's where Sam Hunt went to school. He was a couple of years ahead of me. He got strapped for reading one of Baxter's books, which was sexually explicit. He was sent down to the principal's office and got strapped. It's mentioned in my book there. But I was very keen on James K. Baxter, his Autumn Testament, Honi Tūwhare. Some of those New Zealand poets were very much part of my reading.
Mm. So Ruth, your parents were they obviously loved books and reading and knew the importance of them. But yes. Your dad was he was a gold miner at one stage. He was a fireman and worked in all sorts of different interesting areas. And your mother ran the house as a boarding house even. So there was an entrepreneurial spirit there, wasn't there? But so what led you to books in your colourful life?
Well, of course, I read the same books as Tony. Can you all hear me? And my grandmother, she was actually Australian, and she had this amazing lounge, and on the bottom shelf of a library there were some exquisite leather-bound heavy books that I used to pull out as a young child, and it had that gorgeous tissue paper between the etchings in it. And I used to sit there and just wonder how these books were put together, who wrote them, who did the drawings. And I was just drawn into the world of books because both my grandmothers were readers and also my mother. But I was hoping that, and when I was about 18 or 19, that when my grandmother died, she would leave me these beautiful, beautiful books. But I was in the Navy when my grandmother died and the books disappeared. But I'm just going to go offline a little bit.
Absolutely.
We
love it.
Which is usually what I do. But anyway...
I had a thought. I thought it might be like this.
Yes. So this is just a very quick story about my grandmother, who was a very strict Catholic. And my grandfather was atheist, and just around the corner from us lived Elsie Locke, who most of you will remember. Elsie Locke, she wrote a lot of books, and she was just around the corner, and she was popping out children. I think she had about 6 children, and they were the same age as us, so we used to play with them. But anyway, my mother, she married when she was very young, and my mum told me the story about Elsie Locke, that we lived with our grandmother for about 4 years when my mum and dad got married. And one of Elsie's older sons came racing around to my grandmother's, calling out to mum, saying, Mrs. Hopday, mum's on the floor with the newspapers. And Mum didn't know what this meant, but he said, you've got to come, Mum's on the floor with the newspapers. So Mum took off with this little boy round to Elsie Locke's place, and she got there just as she gave birth to her next child, on the floor on the newspaper. That's a story that you didn't know about Elsie Locke.
Yes, of course. How many, out of interest, how many people have read The Bookseller from the End of the World? Ah,
Oh,
yes.
thank you.
And I'll leave your hands up if you've been to Manapuri, to those bookstores.
Oh,
Wow.
look.
So if all of the rest of you go there at the same time, you'll have to queue, because they're just little stores, aren't they? Tell us a little bit about them.
Well, the first one was built so that it would fit inside the perimeters of me not having to get a council permit. And it was interesting. So it arrived on the back of a truck and placed on foundations. And I thought this was just going to be a very, very easy little hobby. But it was excellent because it meant I could buy lots of books. We've got a little house that's full of books, and we've got another little cottage that's full of books. And my dear husband, who's sitting here, said that I had to take a book out if I was going to bring a book in. So the bookshop meant I could buy lots of books. But what happened, of course, was that the small bookshop was too small. So then we got the children's bookshop, and then we got the snug. And I promised Lance I would not have another bookshop. So what I did was we put up a huge marquee. And
So you weren't intending to sell the books in the first place? You're just going to collect them, do you think?
just wanted to look at them and know that they were there. And if I got the occasional customer, it would be great. But yeah, it just kind of ballooned, and now it's totally out of control. Lance has been pulled out of retirement to work with me. I've employed 2 people, and it's just, and I have 40-seater buses turn up. And so we have to tell the guides.
Crowd control.
Yeah, 10 can come in at a time. They're only allowed to take 1 photo of me, so please have them all around me. And and I had to have my bike stand extended because so many people turn up on bikes. And I'm not going to hog this time, but anyway.
Yeah, plenty of time.
When my Bookshop Dogs came out, it was interesting that people started turning up with their dogs. And they'd say, oh, and they'd be hanging on to the book and say, oh, we've read your book, and I've bought so-and-so to come and meet you. And so I have all these dogs coming now to see me, which is wonderful because I love dogs. And they say, are you going to write a sequel? Because, you know, he's so lovely.
Are you?
No. I'm not. It's really incredible. Anyway, Tony.
Actually, Ruth's bookshop is very important because sadly...
It's not in your book.
Yeah, no. It'd all been finished by the time I knew about your bookshop, Ruth. Sorry. But I did make a special trip to go and visit Ruth's bookshop just recently. But just coming back to bookshops, sadly, bookshops or second-hand bookshops are unfortunately, they're starting to close around the country, and they're an endangered species. During the time since writing my book here, I know of 6 second-hand bookshops that have closed. So that's why Featherston Booktown is so important. You know, there's strength in numbers. You've got 7 here. There have been a couple of new ones. There's one in Parnell, one in Wanaka, and one in Lawrence and Centro Otago. But yeah, unfortunately, they're a diminishing number. And that's why things like book fairs are very important to me. They are really special. If all second-hand bookshops die out, the book fairs will be there where books circulate. Last weekend I was up for Vincent O'Sullivan's funeral, and on the day after, Nio had a book fair there, and it was just wonderful to be there again. There's a beautiful harmony when you're there with others looking at books. And in Dunedin, we have the Region 24-hour book sale that's been going about 45 years. I've only missed about 2 of those. And people die. What happens to their books? They circulate, recirculate. So you go to these book fairs and you'll see books that are quite special, perhaps quite rare too. So support those book fairs too, because I say the demise of the second-hand bookshop is happening.
Yes, can I just say that it's important that we don't, in this sort of subject that talked about what to do with your books, and these charity bookshops and also book fairs and things are a way for books to circulate. And that's the key thing about books. I always think of books a bit like friends. They come and go through your life, but not all of them are there when you pass on. They are to be shared and enjoyed. So I don't think people should worry about we were talking about it yesterday, weren't we, about the worry of what to do with your big book collection when you have to downsize. But actually, it's not like that. It shouldn't be like that. They're there to be enjoyed and to move through different hands. And the printed book particularly is great for that.
Yep. Perhaps I'll just do a wee short reading on book as object, which is very important to me as well. So just from the book here, when I talk of the printed book as a collectible object, I'm referring to the sensory experience of holding and reading it, of its smell and the visual impact of its age, design, texture and binding. What can be more drooling for the bibliophile than gently handling a slightly foxed, deckel-edged, out-of-print first edition, complete with tight spine and boards and rare dust jacket in near-fine condition? I once shared my reverence for the book with my grandson Michael, who was 6 years old at the time. Inviting him into the comfortable leather chair in my wood-panelled study, I gave him his first introductory lecture on the great literary classics and the importance of good book care, like not folding down the corner page as a bookmark. Gran folds them, he innocently revealed, oblivious to my apoplectic eye bulging and sputtering. And another wee bit on that. Speaking of Sherlock Holmes, you don't need the nose of a bloodhound to detect the distinctive smell of old books when you step into a second-hand bookshop. Scientists, as olfactory detectives, have been at pains to categorise and describe the subtle smell of old books. Descriptors like smoky, earthy, woody or vanilla have been put forward. Supposedly a book's ageing combination of paper, and glue, ink and fabric releases its chemical compounds that produce the irresistibly faint smell known so well to bibliophiles. When I open the book to my library in the morning, I'm welcomed by that hard-to-define scent of old books, which, if I were to search for a comparison, reminds me of the Jamaican rum scent of a Borkum Riff pipe tobacco. There is even now a range of perfumes and aerosols on the market that mimic the smell of books. Perfect to spray onto your e-book device to salve a guilty conscience for crossing over to the digital dark side. Yeah.
Very good. I thought I might just. I'm interested in how much your setting applies to encouraging you to be a bookophile. I mean, a bibliophile. You're living in Dunedin. That must be one of the most literary cities in the country. I think if there was a state of origin literary contest between different cities, Dunedin would probably win, wouldn't it? With Janet Frame and J.K. Baxter, it'd be pretty hard to beat that in sort of the Olympics.
And Tony and Ruth.
Yes, and absolutely, Tony and Ruth. But do you think that's, were you drawn to Dunedin as an example in any way, or is it just or has that enhanced your literary enjoyment?
Well, I grew up in Auckland, but married a Dunedin woman, so came down for holiday and still there 45 years later. But Dunedin is a UNESCO City of Literature. We fought for that. So you mentioned Janet Frame, James K. Baxter. We, of course, have the Burns Fellowship. Year after year, notable writers come there to spend a year being able to write with a stipend. We have...
and the Hocken Library.
Pardon?
The Hocken Library.
Oh, yes.
Hocken.
Yep. We have a writer's walk in the Octagon, the statue of Robbie Burns looking over them. So, yes, Dunedin is a very special place. It's attracted writers and artists too. They come there, like Vincent O'Sullivan, for instance, from Wellington, who went down there and spent many years there. We have we have hard to find books, which of course is in Auckland as well. Sadly, Scribes closed a few years ago. The bulldozers came in and the owners were given 1 month to get out. Now there's just an empty car park there. Dead Souls is another good one. And then out at Port Chalmers, Arcadia Books. It's run by Jim Van Isselroy. He was in Sam Hunt's class, so got a nice wee connection there. A very special place for books, Dunedin. Yep.
Yeah. What about Manapuri? No, because you're
What would you like to
you're
know
brought
about
up in your early life was Christchurch, wasn't it?
I was brought up in Christchurch, and then I came to Manapuri when I was in my mid-30s because of Lance. You know, women seem to follow their men. And up until that stage, I not only collected books, I seemed to collect husbands. And very luckily, Lance was the best of the bunch, so he's been around.
He made the cut.
Yeah, he made the cut, so he's been around for 40 years nearly. But Manapuri, you wouldn't really think that a village with just over 220 people would have a bookshop, let alone 3. But it is a really, really great place where I meet so many fantastic people and dogs, and it doesn't really matter if I don't sell anything because I'm retired and the government pays me. So it's really lovely that I can give books away, and quite often there wouldn't be a day goes past where I don't give a book away. And if somebody asks for something special and it's in my own library, I will run in and get it and give it to them because I know it's going to a good home. And that's really, really important to me, that all my books go to a good home. Quite often not quite often, but it will happen about once a month. Somebody will pull a book out of a shelf and I say, why have you chosen that book? And they say, oh, I like the cover, or it just feels nice or something. And I say, well, I don't really think it's the book for you. So actually I'm not going to sell it to you. and they look at me quite surprised. And so then I say, well, look, it's really important to me. I haven't got many books because it's such a small bookshop, that every book goes to a home where it's going to be loved or cherished and handed on to someone. And I don't think that's going to happen with this book. Nobody walks out. They kind of look stunned at me, but nobody walks out. And quite often they say, well, what book would you suggest I buy?
Which is, you can...
Isn't that nice?
It's very nice. You touched on something there which I think really comes through in both your books, is that you both have a wonderful social conscience. I think your lives have been led in a way that you've obviously, like Tony, you in early days you were obviously influenced by your reading, but also by some of the things that you did as a young person. Even working at Oakley. Work experience there at psychiatric hospital, you probably saw some of the people at risk in the community, and then later you with Corso, and some of you've always had a very strong sense of caring for other people and in society generally. Perhaps just sort of, do you think books have enhanced that or that worldly sort of take?
In some ways, I think it actually came from our Catholic upbringing. I was just saying to Dave the other day, if you look at who works for social welfare, MSD, some of them are sort of ex-Catholics. So that sense of social justice, I think, comes from that. Maybe parental background too. I mean, my parents were, left-leaning Labour supporters. But yeah, I think perhaps the school system, where that came from. So yeah, I worked for Corso and Trade Aid, and not that case about the mental hospitals. That was just a group of teenagers who would visit Oakley Hospital in Auckland, take a few sweets and cigarettes, and we'd go into what they call a criminally insane ward. Those have been locked up for murder or whatever. A very powerful experience to see men in that condition. That was M3. F7 was a women's ward there where Janet Frame spent some time, and the writer Maurice Duggan was in there for alcohol-related reasons. And then Oakley too, Robin Hyde was there. She wrote two of her books there, Journalese and I forget what the other one was.
Passport to...
Passport to Hell, yeah. I think that's where it's come from anyway, just from my school background.
So just segueing into that, what are some of the... I've noticed some of your favourite authors were people like Thomas Mann, Daphne du Maurier, Muriel Spark, Jack Kerouac. They're all pretty powerful writers dealing with quite important themes, aren't they?
Yep. My book is essentially a celebration of New Zealand literature and a celebration of the second-hand bookshop. But and I had probably about 3,000 books at home, but a good number of them are my favourite overseas writers as well. A sad fact, when you look at New Zealand literature, of all the books published in New Zealand each year, only about 7% are New Zealand fiction. What is it? Cultural cringe or something? But we have just a wonderful history of writing, and for me, I'm a Kiwi, and I read those books and I identify with where I've come from. So I encourage you to read New Zealand literature. Obviously you get the big names, with Burnham Wood, Eleanor Catton. There's so many female writers: Fiona Kidman, Marilyn Duckworth, Janet Frame, and obviously Maurice Duggan. All the Morrises, what are the three Morrises now? Morris Shadbolt.
Morris G.
Morris G.
I think as a bookseller, I can perhaps just talk to that a little bit too. I think there has been a lack of appreciation of New Zealand fiction, but it is growing. It's definitely growing, and we do read less, or buy and read less of our Indigenous authors than other countries do per head of population, which is interesting. Australia is really growing in that area, but it is growing. It is changing very rapidly, which is great.
Yep. Of course, poetry is extremely popular. There's hundreds of poets in New Zealand who want to write poetry. They're published in small quantities, maybe 200, maybe less, 50 or whatever. I've got a very large collection of New Zealand poetry, which I absolutely love. And they're packed shelves, but once a week I'll pull out one and just have it facing there. And I won't read a whole book at once. I'll just select a few. So even around the bookshops, while I've been here this weekend, I've picked up a couple of I hadn't seen before. Kevin Ireland, who just died a few months back. The wealth of New Zealand poetry is absolutely fantastic. You carry a wee bit in your shop, David?
We have a very big selection of poetry. Yeah, it's important to us.
I don't.
That's all right, Ruth. I'll forgive you.
But you love New Zealand writing, don't you?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Yeah. Any favourites?
I really like Alan Buck, and I like the Māori, and that's what moves a lot in my shop are the local Māori writers, which is really, really good. Yeah. They like to take a book home that is written by a Māori, so I have lots of those. I'm going to change tack again.
Good.
I think since I've written this book, I've realised that lots of people with dogs don't know that dogs get dementia. Does anybody here know that dogs get dementia? Yeah, that's great. And I was thinking of this last night, and I thought I've got to get this in somewhere.
Totally, yeah.
We had a part-time dog called Cove, who we looked after when his fisherman owner would go away fishing. And Cove was the Bookshop Dog. Some of you might have met him. He was a beautiful black all-sort. And anyway, about a year ago, he started being very vacant and very clingy. And then one day, Lance was sitting on the sofa and Cove went up to him and just stared at him. And his cheeks were all puffed out like that. And Lance said, Cove's trying to tell me something. And he just stared at Lance. And then he gave up and he just walked away and he pooed on the floor. And Lance said, oh, that's what he was trying to tell me. He wanted out. But anyway, just so the crux of the story, and I'll bring it quickly, is that one of the first signs of dementia in a dog is that they will pee inside or poo inside. And they become very embarrassed, of course, because it's something they don't want to do. So that was the first. I took him to the vet, and the vet said, yes, he's starting to get dementia, and he went downhill very, very quickly. And it happened after I had finished the book. But what is interesting is how many people don't know why their dog has become clingy all of a sudden, wants to be near you, is scared when you leave the room, and poos on the floor. He's got dementia. There you are.
You're feeling better now?
I am. I thought I've got to get this off my chest because it's going to bug me.
Okay. Dogs, actually, the other thing I was aware of this for some time, but I didn't realise quite the powerful thing that dogs can provide is that with young children reading to dogs. I thought that was really interesting because they're they just listen, they're non-judgmental, and building confidence amongst reading to dogs is a wonderful thing to.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, no, it's really good. Tell us about a couple of the other dogs in your wonderful, charming book. It's just a wonderful book. I loved it. Hansa and.
Yeah, well, Hansa was very, very special. It was interesting that I knew that my publishers wanted me to write the second part of my life story, and I wasn't emotionally prepared. And I thought I've got to write something that is more fun and easier to write. And one day a car pulled up outside the bookshop, and I hadn't even opened, I was still putting books out. And this lady came over, the guy went into the snug, and this lady saw a book I just pulled up, and it was called Wolf. And she went, oh, a book, Wolf. She raced off back to the car and let this dog out. And I said, oh, a dog, what's it called? And she said, what? It's Woof Woof. And I said, really? And she said, I've got to buy that book. And so I thought, this is strange because I get all these strange stories about dogs in the bookshop. And I thought, I think I might actually try and write a book about that. So I dashed off 2,000 words and sent it to my publisher, and they said, yes, this looks good, why don't we go along this way? And so that's how this book started. And I thought, this is going to be easy because lots of people come to my shop with their dogs, and I just absolutely love them. But I didn't factor in the helicopter parents of the dogs. That if I wrote a story about a dog, I had to give it to the helicopter parents. And they're not all helicopter parents, but a lot of them were. And say, if you want anything changed, let me know. Well, there's one dog in the book that I rewrote the story 5 times. And I said to them, this is the last time. I'm not changing anything else in the story. And they said, but you haven't got that he really loves to swim. And I said, but every dog loves to swim. But he really, really loves to swim. So anyway, he ended up in the book. And then the owners kept on coming to the bookshop and saying, how's the book going? Has it been published yet? When's the publication? And then the helicopter father said to me, what would it take to have our dog on the front cover.
So,
True story.
yes.
No, it's not. It's
So
not.
is this
no,
the dog?
no, it's not on the front cover.
Oh, we wondered what it was, how much it was. But dogs have also been really quite an important part of your work life too, in the sense of...
Absolutely. With Hansa, if any of you haven't read this book, I have written some stories about Hansa, a young runt German shepherd that worked with me when I was working with youth in Invercargill. And I found that so many of the youth were so abused that they had no trust in adults, and so for me to get through to them I was wasting time because they wouldn't confide in me or talk to me. They were just happy to sit and be quiet, so I was making no headway with them. So I thought I would get a dog and they would talk to the dog, and that's what happened. We got Hansa. He was quite young when we got him, and I had a van and he sat in the back of the van, and the kids used to go in the back of the van and talk to Hansa. And so I would hear what was happening in their lives because they weren't telling me, they were telling Hansa. And so over a period of time, they would then get confidence to talk to me. It speeded the process up of them getting to know me and trust me. But Hansa was also, he became extremely well known around Invercargill. And when he was stolen, the whole of Invercargill became very, very proactive in finding him. Even the radio station sent out a call and said, if anybody knows where Hansa is, please ring us, we'll come and get him, you won't be charged or anything like that. All the kids that knew Hansa were looking for him, and very luckily we found him. And he'd been stolen by a guy that had to check in with the police every night, and he thought Hansa was a police dog, and so he stole him. But after 3 days he realised that Hansa wasn't a police dog because he didn't attack or anything like that. So we found him, thank goodness. But he was always there for the kids. And so I wrote different little snippets on how Hansa helped teenagers in Invercargill.
Would you like to, you haven't read from the book, would you like to read from either of the books? Just a little reading? What do you think? Just to get a flavour of the
Perhaps while Ruth is finding that, I'll tell a story as well. Just, again, collecting books. One of the nice things I find sometimes, you pick up a book and it's got a name in it, an association of some sort. And this is a Featherstone story. Last year, my son, who's here today, I see, which is great, bought a box of books from Dunbar Sloan. It was an auction, and I happened to be in Wellington there, and I was just going through the box with him. And there were a couple of little journals I pulled out called Short Story International, 1965 and 66 journals. Opened it up, and there was Joy Cowley's mother's name and address inside. Yeah. And then in these two, there were two stories. One was the Silk, a very moving story of hers, and one called The Moth. But inside one of the books, it had Mum and Dad, thanks for all your help, see page 78 for my story there. In the back of the book, there was a photo sellotaped in of Ruth in her 20s, Joy Cowley, in her 20s and her father. And I said to Mike, look, I think these are important, they should go back to Joy. And anyway, I got hold of Joy, and of course she was over the moon because she had forgotten about these books, or forgot about the names of them. And she said, look, I'd really like these to go to the Turnbull Library because they now have my manuscripts. And it turned out that these were a gap in what they had. So, and I've got other stories like that too. So, you know, keep your eyes open for things like that. And sometimes you may be able to return these back to the author or an association with them. You found your page now, Ruth?
Okay, this is, I'm just going to read a little bit of it about a little boy that used to come and sit in the van with Hunza. And so I'll just read a little bit. After a few weeks, when I was driving him home, I overheard him say softly, "Hunza, want to come with me? We can look after each other." This is a pretty sad story. "Do you think you could chase my father away?" "I know you could." There was silence as he hugged the dog. I stopped the van and climbed into the back, sitting opposite them. "You can't take Hunza home, sweetheart, but maybe between us we can do something." He shook his head and tried to hide his tears. "It has to be Hunza," he said. "What does he understand?" I asked. "Everything." "What time does your dad get home?" "Tea time." It was just before 5 p.m, so we had a little time before his father arrived. I drove quickly to his house and told him to stay with Hunza in the van while I went to speak to his mother. The door opened even before I knocked. His mother stood in the doorway, her face bruised, and when she spoke, I noticed some teeth were broken. "I'm Ruth. Your wee boy is in the van with Hunza." "I know all about Hunza," she said. "Thanks. Pack a couple of bags and I'll take you both to a safe house." She stood looking at me with wet, vacant eyes, her arms clasped tightly around her body. "Please let me help," I pleaded. I saw a tiny nod, and we raced inside and packed bags. We closed the door behind us and ran up to the van. She hugged her wee boy and then grabbed Hunza and wept. "Thank you, thank you, thank you, you precious dog," she sobbed.
Cool. Well, what do you say to that? But the great thing about that book, though, is that it's full of those sort of stories, but it's also full of humour. It's a wonderful. Here's the bookseller in me. It's a wonderful gift for people. It's quite uplifting, actually. The whole
Really, after that?
Yeah. I was just trying to say that. The other thing about all three books that you've got, it's beautiful to see them all in hardback, and in a lovely size. Quite often books, don't get me wrong, Gregory O'Brien's book on Don Binney is fantastic, and it's big and beautiful, and it needs to be to portray the paintings and to do justice to the story. But these books are just the beautiful hardbacks. Did you have to convince the publishers to do that, or was it a natural progression? I was interested in that part of it.
Because of the nature of the book, my publisher was extremely gracious and involved me in the whole process. So the actual size of mine, I chose. I took that photograph in the front. I like the feel of a pocket-sized book like that, and the feel of a hardback as well. And this one, beautifully produced. It's stitched, not glued. I loved, you take off the dust jacket, you see the same inside. So often, in the past, the boards were black or one colour or whatever. One reviewer said this is one of the best locally produced books he'd seen for a long time. This is Mary Egan Publishing. Mary Egan was if you open any Penguin paperback of the 1990s, you'll see on the cover there, typeset by Mary Egan print or designed by Mary Egan. So her and the daughters have their own publishing business up in Mangawhai. Yes, they produce beautiful books.
It's lovely to see the smaller publishers starting to thrive again in this country, because early on it was always the smaller publishers that produced all the beautiful books. Although they're like another Dunedin name, the Reeds, A.H. and A.W. Reed. You must have a lot of those books in both in your collections, and they were they're a fabulous publisher, weren't they? Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's nice to see smaller publishers.
So
Ruth, your
it
book's from
was-
a major.
Ellen and Unwin, and they decided to do a hardback, which I was really delighted with. They sent us three for the bookseller. They sent us 3 or 4 paintings from different artists for the cover of the bookseller. And Lance and I looked at them and we didn't like any of them. And so we emailed Jenny, the publisher, and said that we weren't really happy with, they were too busy and too colourful. And so they had just employed a new artist, and her name's Sophie, and they said, oh, we'll see what she comes up with. And she came up with the cover that is there now, and that's exactly what I would have liked.
Perfect,
So she also did this one, and that was in response to how much does it cost to basically get my dog on the front.
So quite a lot of people put up quite a lot of money by the looks of it.
So for 100,000 each, they got their dog on the front.
Well, it's going to only be one
Money
dog,
raised
but-
for charity. No, so it was decided by the publishers that they would just pick random dogs and put them on the front. So they're all in the book. The one on this little black one down here with the kind of bird wing ears is Cove. And we had to have him put down in February. He was 17 and a half. And
Wow.
so he's in my next book.
Is it true that smaller dogs live longer than bigger dogs?
I don't know. Well, he's
I think
17
I
and a
read that.
half.
That's what I thought.
105.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. I think that's one of the interesting little asides to digital, the digital explosion and e-books and all the online thing is that the publishers who are producing printed books really have had to up their game a bit. And, you know, we've touched on the importance of the book as the whole sensory experience of a book, you know, the look and the smell and the texture, all the senses come into play. And so the design of a book has become more important than what it was perhaps 10, 20 years ago. Yeah, so very nice.
My sayings is I like to judge a book by its cover.
Yeah, I think people still do. I mean, even for us as booksellers, we're kind of influenced by the look of the book, aren't we?
Yeah,
you know, definitely.
Absolutely.
But also the way you hold it. I think those are, as gifts particularly, it comes into play. We weren't going to do questions, but if anybody does have anything they want to ask, just please say. But there is also be an opportunity at the book signing over at the Anzac Hall to have one-on-one questions. But I do see if there's... Yes, have you got a question there?
Oh, well, I will tell you. So the Bernese mountain dog is Tui, who is a reading dog at Queenstown Primary School. And then we've got Hansa and Stella. Stella is a psychotic dog that is not allowed out of the car when she comes to the bookshop and attacks anything white. Then we've got Tala. Oh no, this is Sir Reginald, who belongs to a little boy that comes to the bookshops. Then we've got Tala, who is very sadly, Lewis, his owner, died 2 weeks ago. And Tala, without any training at all, could identify when Lewis was having trouble with his diabetes, and she used to make sure he would wake up or get into the kitchen and have something. And they were very, very tight as a team, and it was really sad when Lewis died. And this one is, of course, Cove. And on the back, we've got Nelson, who is, if you've been to Page and Blackmore's in Nelson is the bookshop dog at Page and Blackmore's. So they're the dogs that got on the cover.
David, the title of this talk was The Dilemma of a Bibliophile. We didn't choose that title, did we? But seeing it's there, perhaps a wee reference to that. And if I could just finish with a little reading on that point. In the chapter called Disposing of Your Library, but a much loved and tattered book we read to our children long ago was Owl at Home by American writer Arnold Lobel. Each little story features the lovable owl in one most memorable episode, Tea Water Tea. Owl sits down to think of things that make him sad. Chairs with broken legs, songs that cannot be sung, pencils too short to use, mashed potatoes left on a plate, and books that cannot be read are some of the sad thoughts sufficient to get Owl crying, so that many large tears can be directed into his kettle to make him a tasty cup of tea, even if a bit salty. If I were to make my own pot of tea water tea, like Owl, my eyes might begin to water with the thoughts of hundreds of books that cannot be read in so little time, and to fill my teapot further, faded spines, missed book-buying opportunities, the closing down of favourite bookshops, and having to dispose of my beloved library in old age are all wistful thoughts sure to do the trick.
Yeah. Nice way to finish. Nice way to finish. That's a lovely way to finish, I think. I think we're there. So thank you so much for your insight into being a bibliophile. It's been a delight to get to know you more as a fellow bibliophile.
I think most of the people here would be in that classification as well.
I see a lot of familiar faces, and I think we all love books, and that's why we're here, and love the printed book. And I think that's the thing to keep treasuring, isn't it? To appreciate it and to enjoy it, and to install it in our children too. I think we haven't touched much on children's books today, but I think both of you love your children's books, don't you? And well, you've got a whole store of them. And I think as if we can all kind of just encourage children to read and to hold a printed book from the very start. I always think of that Dorothy Butler and her vocation in the 60s, babies need books. That book she wrote, and that my dad talked about that a lot and was a great advocate of books for children. So if we can all be ambassadors for the printed book, can't we, in our own way, and loving them on the way. So just to finish off, there's going to be a book signing, as I said, over at Anzac Hall, and I think you'll agree that all three books are a wonderful gift and a wonderful thing to own. So please come over and support that. And I think we also want to make sure you support the Country Tea and Cakes, which is around here too, and enjoy a cup of tea over there. They do a great job. I wanted to also recognise particularly Mary Biggs for the enormous amount of work she puts into this wonderful festival. It's a great thing. I love to support it. I think this region's really strong with books and literature, so it's wonderful. But she's just leading the charge with her fantastic team and all the volunteers. It's really important. And they've asked me just to mention also if you could fill out the online survey to get as much feedback so they can keep improving and help in providing. I think their initiative for young people's too is wonderful too, with giving out the book vouchers. That's a fantastic thing, and all the people that have contributed money to that, just thank you so much. So yes, thank you very much, Tony Eyre, Ruth. It's been fantastic talking with you, and enjoy the rest of the festival, everybody.
Thank you.